really to move people, to have them want to do something or care about something. They have to feel it.
Welcome to the Wisdom of the Body podcast. I'm your host, Heather Grzych. Here, we talk about the profound connection between mind, body, and spirit. Join me and other authors, wellness experts, and everyday individuals talk about the importance of listening to our bodies, trusting our guts, and living in deeper harmony with nature. So, whether you're seeking guidance on your wellness journey or simply looking for inspiration, you're in the right place. We're thrilled to be in the top 3% of podcasts globally. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and most other places where people listen to podcasts. You can follow by joining my email list at heathergrzych.com or by following me on Instagram at Heather Grzych. That's Heather, Grzych. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Today, I'm here with Nina Schuyler. She's the author of the collection/novel, In This Ravishing World. She's the author of 6 books, 4 fiction, 2 nonfiction books about craft of writing. Her short story collection, which is her latest book, In This Ravishing World, won the W.S. Porter Prize and Prism Prize for Climate Literature and was published in July 2024. And this book is actually both novelesque and short story-esque. So we're talking with a master of writing, master of the craft here today. She's also written other novels, Afterword, The Translator, and The Painting. And her 2 books about craft are both bestsellers. So How to Write Stunning Sentences and Stunning Sentences, Creative Writing Journal. Her short stories have been published in Zizava, Chicago Quarterly Review, Fugue, Nashville Review, and elsewhere, and have been nominated for a Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net. She teaches creative writing for Stanford Continuing Studies, The Writing Salon, and Book Passage. Nina, so thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's such a pleasure. Excited to talk to you.
I'm totally thrilled to chat about your books and learn about how you connect with nature through your writing and how you help your readers connect with nature through your writing. And I love the title of your latest book, In This Ravishing World. I don't think I've ever thought of the world as ravishing. And I just even wanted to start with that as an idea. Like, what gave you this idea that the world would be ravishing?
I love that word because it's a contronym. It means 2 very different things, ravishingly beautiful. And to ravish something is to savage it. And so in the world, there's so much astonishing, amazing gorgeousness. At the same time, it is being ravished by human behavior. And we're part of the world, right? They're in this ravishing world. And sometimes nature ravishes it when a meteorite hits the earth and essentially upsets the whole climate as it's done in the past. So the world, I love the title because it holds all. It's not one or the other, it's both. And the longer I think about things, people, writing fiction, telling stories, the more I want to contain all and not have the reader settle onto a concrete way or concrete definition. Because in my worldview, everything is constantly becoming. And the more you settle into a concrete vision of something or a label, the less likely you are going to continue becoming. So I really like that word because it's fluctuating back and forth as it moves from ravishingly beautiful to ravish and savagery and destruction, back and forth. And it contains it all.
That is so playful. I love that you brought that up about the labels, because in healing professions, I think being a complementary provider, a lot of people want the label. They want to know the diagnosis. And like you said, everything is always changing, which to a certain extent, you have to know what you're dealing with. So labels can be helpful, but the labels are also only temporary, which is so cool. I love that you played with that idea. And words are so powerful. They can, just by having a thought with some different words, can make us feel differently in our bodies. And your latest work, In This Ravishing World, you give nature a voice in the book. So, what actually inspired you to explore that idea? Why was it important to give nature a voice?
Thanks for asking. It took a lot of thinking about this and playing with it. So I had written Eleanor. She's kind of a character. She's 70 years old and she's an environmental economist and she weaves in and out of stories. So you keep seeing her appear in someone else's story. There she is again. She is in deep grief and despair because of where the ecosystem is now, all the work that she's done to try to convince companies to become sustainable, to not pollute the air, to not pollute water and the dirt and the land, not to pollute. That's her job. And yet, look at where we are. I got pretty far with her, and it's like, this isn't going to work, or it's not enough. And then I heard Governor Gavin Newsom, after one of the wildfires, it could have been the 2018, 2017 fire, I can't remember, who he was standing in a burned out forest and said, basically, nature's talking. And a spark went off. It's like, wow, I'm a fiction writer. What's it saying? What does it want us to hear? And that I started playing with the voice. And the more I played with it, the only first person omniscient voice in the story, and it's weaving in and out of all the stories. And in the beginning, when I wrote it, the voice was really angry and it was so mad at what's happening. And I started thinking, like, there's no way someone is going to listen to this rant. And what nature really wants us to do is listen and form a relationship with it. So who listens to someone that's constantly angry? And then I remembered we are nature. We're not separate. Humans are nature. So if there's affinity with nature, then there has to be similar emotions going on. So nature suddenly became compassionate and sad as well, and reaching out to humans and trying to find the right way to speak to humans so the ear could listen. And that gave a far more nuanced voice to nature. And that felt like, okay, this is working. Like, if nature wants to thrive and it's also wanting humans to exist and thrive, this is the kind of voice that's compassionate and full of warmth, full of sorrow, just like a human voice in a way. But it's the thing that was huge to think about was that, the earth is 4.5 billion years old. So it's known all the characters in the book since their beginning. It holds all the memories. It holds all the memories when trees first came into being, or the first amoeba. So that also gave it a very different temporal frame. And I have a chapter on deep time, going back to 4.5 billion years ago, and the evolution essentially of vegetation and then life, and ending up with mammals and the Homo sapien. So that was a really intricate chapter to write. One more thing about nature, and I know we can move on after that, but I wanted nature to weave in and out of these stories because I wanted the structure of the book to be emblematic and remind people that the human story is contained in a much bigger story. And it's not the only story. So many books are written where it's only about the humans, and it's almost like the rest of the world doesn't exist. And so I wanted nature to be the bigger voice, that first person omniscient, which means it knows so much that we're in it. We're contained in it. We're contained in this big, big 4.5 billion year story. And the more we can remember that, we're at the end of this huge evolutionary chain. Maybe the more grateful we might be and honoring of what brought us to this particular point in time.
Wow. I feel like a lot of people have to do mushrooms to understand this. It's like psychedelic use is such a big thing in our culture right now. And I feel like a lot of people, in order to get that kind of connection, are having to do those hallucinogenic experiences to sort of transcend their day-to-day limitations of their filters in order to connect with this broader entity of nature beyond the filters. And, you giving nature a voice for people and, having this realization when Gavin Newsom, right, of all people, right, a politician gives you this idea to connect with this voice of nature. Was that the moment when you heard Gavin say that? Was that the moment where you're like, okay, I definitely have to give nature a voice here?
Yeah, and when he said it, because I'm writing about, I'm spiraling around climate change. So all the 9 different stories and 9 different characters and points of view have different responses to it. And yet, what was going to hold them all together? One, it's located in the Bay Area. All these stories take place in the Bay Area. So that's a unifying or cohesive force. But to do something to bring nature alive like that, I remember growing up, my mom used to play the record, the songs of the humpback whale, and it would float in our house. And then I did a little research about it. That record was put out in 1970, I think. And it still is the most popular kind of animal sound record ever. That led to legislation, international laws against killing whales, because the population became aware that whales weren't just making sounds, they were making songs. So the power of anthropomorphizing was demonstrated way back then when that record came out and everyone became concerned that we're killing these song manifesting creatures. How could we do that? So to me, that was an argument to try to anthropomorphize nature. For whatever reason, we've evolved as a species to look for human like traits in other beings so that we can form a relationship. Once we discovered that, for example, trees are talking, we discovered that through Richard Powers, who used the research from a forest scientist, that trees are communicating in the fungal system underneath the ground and exchanging resources and helping each other out. And if a beetle comes that's eating, they'll transfer resources to try to help that tree survive. Once we understand that there are traits and qualities that are human-like, we seem to care. So all of that thinking was like, well, this may be, even though some people don't like anthropomorphizing, it may be a really powerful tool to begin the healing process with nature and learning to take care of it. So, it was risky to write and to try to embody what this voice might be. Now, you mentioned transcending limits of filter. That's what a good fiction writer is constantly doing. You're doing well when the self dissolves. When I don't feel like myself, I feel like a first person omniscient 4.5 billion billion year entity, then I'm doing well writing. So I don't need drugs to do it. It's a daily practice to try to dissolve the self and become part of, another way of being, essentially.
I love that you said that. I don't need drugs to do it. Thank you so much for saying that, and I'm haunted by this memory of when I was in India in 2015, and I did this like hike around a mountain at sunrise, well, before the sun came up. And it was I don't know, some kind of 14-kilometer hike. And I did it with this woman who, she was kind of like a religious monk-like figure. And she was in her 80s and she did it barefoot. And it's just a really interesting experience. And one of the towns that we walked through on the way, this woman came out of her house with a garbage bag full of trash, black garbage bag, and just walked out her front door, walked across the street, and threw it in the woods. And what's interesting is that, and I was so upset. I was so angry. I was so angry that she did that. Like, how could you do that? That's horrible. And I wanted to yell at her. And, I'm a foreigner. That's not my country, but like, this is the earth. This is the land. And obviously, being in India, there's so much like trash issues in general. So you're kind of like on high alert about it. Also, when that happened, I remembered being a young girl and throwing a garbage bag in the woods. And I remembered that I had no connection and no understanding of the consequence of that. What do you think gives people that understanding of how they are connected to nature?
I think it starts really early. I volunteer for a group called Children for Change and help empower kids to become positive leaders of change, especially in the climate area. So they gather weekly and brainstorm ideas of what we can do, what they want to do to help the environment. These are ages 5 to 11. So we're raising consciousness intentionally and giving them agency and power to make decisions, and the adults help them implement the plan. So in the book, for instance, and this is true, two girls decided they wanted to address and confront Kellogg's because the Kellogg's company was cutting down palm trees, and that's the habitat of the orangutans. So they made a petition and gathered 1,000 signatures and sent it to Kellogg's, and they got a nice letter back. It's like, okay, thank you. And that wasn't enough. And then they gathered 100,000 signatures. And then the Kellogg's invited them to the company, and they met the executives, and they said, thank you, we'll try to do this by 2050. That wasn't enough. And this is the beauty of youth, right? The energy and the I will not be stopped. They gathered 1,000,000. And then they got Kellogg's 1,000,000 signatures, and Kellogg's invited them back and said, okay, we'll stop. But they just kept going. And, I don't know if they have an organization, Children for Change, but it's like it starts early, and there's such powerful engines of change without the skepticism or cynicism or awareness of the obstacles along the way, that they can actually achieve things. I'm watching the Sunrise Movement, for example, how much they're doing in the environmental sphere, young kids, teenagers that are standing up to the solidified forces that are there, especially oil and gas. But the connection, I think, has to start early. Now, it's never too late, right? You're aware now, right? You'd never go dump your garbage out there. I think it's also just the development of consciousness and development of awareness that the self is not confined to skull and skin. And once you walk into a room, it makes you feel a particular way. You meet someone, it's like you instantly are drawn to them, or you are not drawn to them. So the self extends far beyond skin and skull. And once you are conscious and reflective, you start understanding I am highly connected to the world around me. It's not just me, the solitary person. And this goes back to why I structured the book this way. I had Eleanor, probably have 50 pages of her. And the climate crisis is not going to be solved by a traditional story structure of a single hero saving everyone. It's going to require all of us, whatever talent, whatever skill, whatever thing you can do. That's what you have to do. So then once I said, okay, the book has to be shaped like the answer to the problem, and it's a huge communal effort, then the other characters started coming into the book. Ava is the daughter of Eleanor, and she's a scientist developing bacteria to eat plastic, which is going on now. Her son Ed is a ballet dancer, and he's performing art, trying to enter the consciousness of a rat on stage and become a rat, and his friend is becoming a cat. And so playing with that. And then there's other characters, a woman who loves dogs, and she goes to the Humane Society and constantly cares for the dogs, and she prefers dogs to humans. And then there's a tech executive who wants to buy land in New Zealand and escape to is there such a thing as a climate haven? Well, a lot of people are ending up in New Zealand thinking that's it. So everything started proliferating, and the responses to actions to the climate crisis. And that felt like that was the structure for the book. So that's a very long answer of how do you start feeling your connection to something other than the singular self, which is really a Western mythology.
Yeah, it's interesting as you were sort of broadening the perspective to understand, to point out the fact that we're connected on a larger scale beyond our bodies. One thing flashed into my mind, which was I would love to know what was going through her head when she did that, to be in the mind of where was she when she did that? Why did she do that? And I guess that's, I don't know.
I think, I've really lately, given the political climate right now, watched where I'm spending my money. And I think it's In the West, especially, the value has been convenience.
Mm-hmm.
It's convenient to go dump your trash across the road rather than have it stink up your house or wait for a garbage man or a garbage truck to come or whatever, right? It's just get rid of it. I don't have to see it anymore. That's convenient. But there have to be, at this late stage right now, there have to be other values than convenience.
Mm. Yeah. And so the bringing up challenges of modern life, and like you said, at this late stage of the game, where there wasn't human civilization before, we didn't have buildings and cars and plastic and all the materials that take a long time to regenerate and break down in nature and be part of the cycle, things that take longer to change and shift and find their place back in nature when they're done being used. And all the challenges that come with the more developed society becomes, and the more machines we have and the more materials we have and stuff like that humans have made from materials on the earth and otherwhere. So this idea of moving from a more primitive society into a more developed society, and I think the way you talked about it was previously as a human-centric world to an other than human relational world. So, what is it that you think things are evolving into as this other than human relational world?
Let me back up a little bit. So, in the 19th century, realism literature took precedence over every other type of literature that was going on. Amitav Ghosh writes in The Great Derangement that was at the point where CO2 levels started to rise. So, ironically or interestingly, the human centric story took center stage at the very point in the 19th century where the Industrial Revolution began and we turned away from nature. So, before this was Romanticism, and there was a lot of personification going on, a lot of anthropomorphizing going on, especially among the poets. But we turned away from it. And realism, the human story, became most important. So, what we're reaching now, and we're actually being helped a lot by science, that science is discovering through the use of AI. There's a great book called Sounds of Life by Karen Bacher, who unfortunately died. She was an amazing scientist. Sounds of Life, that they're using AI and digital recorders that can record what the human ear cannot pick up, and looking at the patterns of sounds and that the entity is making, let's say the bats. So she studied bats and correlating it to computer imagery. So they look at the pattern and look at the images that are going on and found out that bats are actually talking. So now we're back to anthropomorphizing. We don't hear it. We thought they were stupid. We thought echolocation, that's it. No, they have names for each other. They have names. So they'll call out a particular sound, and another bat, they watch it on the film, comes over. And then another bat will make this pattern sound, and they all fly east. And there's all the mosquitoes to eat. So they're talking to each other. They've discovered the same thing with the coral reefs. We don't hear it, but again, this system is picking up all the language that they're using. The elephants have names for each other, and they send signals by pounding on the ground, and it reverberates underground, and they'll talk to each other. Like, everybody get ready, there's danger over in the east. Let's move, and the herd moves. So interestingly, science that wants to not use anthropomorphizing, it's kind of essentially banned because they think it will influence the results through bias, like, oh, you're too intimate with these other than human beings or creatures or more than human. I've heard it call it that as well. They're discovering that there's a lot of, quote, human traits to entities that we thought were not anything like us. So there's a real move to, it's eye-opening. The octopus, if you've seen My Octopus Teacher, for example, we've discovered they're brilliant. I mean, they have a different mind. They have 8 minds in their tentacles, but they just have a different kind of intelligence. So there's a budding awareness, and like I mentioned, the trees and the fungi. So a budding awareness that we're not the only intelligent creatures, and maybe we should rethink what we mean by intelligence.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about AI as a tool that is helping people connect with that. Why do you think that's happening with AI?
Well, it's gotten so good that they could do something like this. So the technology has advanced enough. In 2017, my book Afterword is about AI. Female pioneer in artificial intelligence brings back the voice of her dead husband because he died too young. So I did a lot of research on natural language processing. So in 2017, that's when machine learning really took off, and it's based on probability and statistics. And before that, it was more top-down approach, inputting rules into natural language processing and pattern making. So after that, they started playing with all the things you could do with this very powerful technology, especially natural language processing and locating patterns. So it's just a time when the technology has become available and the digital recorders that can pick up sounds that we can't hear has coalesced to open up worlds that before we just wrote off. So I also think that a lot more research is just going on as different stresses are put on the ecological systems. So people are studying how are the plants adapting, and we're seeing some adaptation that's fascinating because it's happening so fast. The plants in drought conditions shut down. I'm not sure of all the terminology, but shut down to preserve their water because they know they're not going to get much. Well, that's been a pretty fast adaptation to drought, the recent droughts.
Yeah. What do you think happens? Like, okay, so AI, we broaden our focus as humans beyond our small selves, and we see that we're connected. We see how things are connected. What happens after that?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of assumptions that enough people are going to see that. I think you see that, I see that, but this is not necessarily a dominant paradigm. If it does become dominant, then there will be a lot more sustainable practices. And really, what that is taking care. And in California, we've seen a lot of resurgence of indigenous practices revive, like controlled burns in the forest. Like that used to be a policy. And then the US Forestry Department said no. But before it was, and it controlled all the underbrush so that a wildfire wouldn't be that extreme. So that ended again around the 19th century. We stopped the controlled burns, and now they're coming back because they work. So there are systems in place if we look to our indigenous populations that to live in balance and to say, this is a hard word for the Western world to say that's enough. Enough. I don't think most people have that, word, but that's something we need to learn. It's like that's enough. I remember covering for some magazine the simplicity movement, and it was revolutionary to say we're going to live. There is a group in the United States like we want to live simply or simpler. That's just embracing enough. We have enough.
Yeah, I've had very different types of lives, very materialistic lives. And I went to grad school basically on an ashram, and I've experimented with a few different ways of living. I've never gone and like lived out in the woods. I've never taken anything to that level, but this idea of living simply is very intriguing. And I think culturally, maybe like millennials and the generation slightly younger than them, maybe fueled by the pandemic, it seems like there's a lot of these people that live like digital nomads,
Yeah.
and they seem really into that idea, because I guess when you're light on your feet, you have to live simply, right? Because you just can't carry all your stuff with you everywhere.
Yeah. I have met people that basically just can move around. And once we had the pandemic, some companies, especially in tech, learned you could Zoom from wherever. It doesn't matter. But that idea of geography won't be a restraint. I don't know. I've never lived that way. I'm really grounded to having feet on the ground and hiking in the dirt. I mean, you can still do that if you're a digital nomad, but it's a really interesting way, just kind of becoming. I'm not from California. I'm a human being, or I'm a being of the earth, was the way they described it to me. It's like, oh, that's such a different frame.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I love talking about words and the craft of writing, and want to tap your brain here while I have you, especially for anyone who's listening who may be writing themselves, whether that's, just for themselves or to share it with others. And I love that you've written both fiction and nonfiction. What do you think the power of words is? What do you think the full capacity of this power is?
Well, let me start with fiction. That's usually why bother writing fiction? You're making stuff up. So, unlike academic writing or facts, fiction speaks to the heart and the body. So, essentially, when you're writing stories, you're writing an experience for the reader. Like, enter this room that I'm going to call a scene. I'm going to give you the sensory feelings here. What can you smell? What can you taste? Sounds. So, and our brains are wired, we have mirror neurons. So, they found that even reading a sound, your auditory processing system goes off. So, if I put a sound in that room, you're experiencing it. So it's like a full immersion experience. And then your imagination lights up and you get to go travel and become these other characters. That's completely different than an academic paper talking about rising CO2 levels. So that's speaking to your intellect or your brain, right? You don't need to involve the body. Now, involving the body is profound because it's an undeniable reality. You can't say, I'm not really feeling this. You are feeling it. So it becomes a reality. If you read a book, it's like, oh, if it's well done, right? I became that character. I felt that. I was scared. I fell in love. I gave things up. I tried something new, carrying along with that character, right? You get to live a million lives. As a writer, I feel like I get to live all these lives, becoming all these different beings, even nature. Now, nonfiction, again, I said it's speaking more to the intellect, to, presenting rational, logical arguments to help you articulate with clarity the way to think about something. And that's a value too. But really to move people, to have them, want to do something or care about something, they have to feel it. So to me, fiction is this amazing, magical world that you possibly can create for someone that it moves them in some way. So I go back to that, songs of the humpback whale, or I'm thinking long ago, I remember reading in grade school, probably middle school, Upton Sinclair's novel, The Jungle, about the meat processing, packing industry. It's like that. I became a vegetarian after I read that. Can't believe what goes on in there. It won the Pulitzer, but it also led to exposing unfair working conditions and unsanitary practices, and it ended up in the Pure Food and Drug Act. So people read that. It's like, we need to change things after that novel.
It really makes you think about everything that you consume. Like you said about fiction talking to the body, that it's a full immersion experience, that it literally lights up the brain, giving the experience of it even happening to you if your ego is dissolving into the character, into the plot, into the story. And I think that's so intriguing. And it also is kind of like everyone should look at what they consume, right? What you watch on Netflix. And I remember while I was studying yoga, this was before I went to school, and one of my yoga teachers was like, you should only be consuming spiritual content. Like, I remember she was saying that, and then I had to figure out, well, what does spiritual mean? But I had a sense that it wasn't horror movies. Although for some people that could be spiritual content because, Zen masters, or the stories of Zen masters chopping people's arms off. So maybe that is spirituality for some people. But this idea that fiction in particular moves people, I think you also talked about, you said stories move people. So do you think it's possible to move people with nonfiction as well, but using real stories?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do. I mean, so we're getting away from journalism or just straight reporting, right? So now we're more in the world of building what I noted as these scenes. So in your nonfiction work, let me put you in this forest. Let you smell the pine trees and the moss below the feet and the texture of the moss. It's soft as you walk through that. So I could build the whole scene, right? And put you through sensory and sensual information all that could immerse you in that world. And that often is called creative nonfiction, that is much more story-like than a straight, Wall Street Journal article about, cutting lumber and what's the rate or whatever. So I want to go back. I think it was Amitav Ghosh said the climate crisis is also a crisis of culture and thus the imagination. And Rebecca Solnit had said, and I love this, every crisis is a crisis of storytelling. So if you're having a personal crisis, it's often a crumbling of a story that you've been telling yourself that no longer fits. For your listeners to relate to this idea of a crisis of storytelling, usually people have a narrative. I am this. I've done this. These are the things I like. I love this. I don't like that. Well, at some point, if you continue becoming that cracks, and you have to face it and come up, either let go of the story or no, it's just a story, or develop a new one. Well, at the cultural level, we have a crisis of storytelling at the cultural level because of the ecological devastation. So that we're going back to the power of story and what it can do for people and the culture.
That's really helpful. I will say, like, talking about science and not science and being an alternative healthcare practitioner where we don't necessarily have the peer reviewed studies that are funded at big institutions because, it doesn't cost a lot of money for herbal medicine. So who's going to make money off of it and invest in it? And one thing I have been finding is, I think that's why testimonials have become very important for people, but also just, and you have to be careful about it because of HIPAA. You can't just like tell people, I can't just like, go out and tell everybody everything about my clients, and they wouldn't want that either. But to share stories of what's possible for people when they are healing. And I've been trying to share those more actually.
Well, we're social creatures. So it's like, oh, he did it. Maybe I could do it. Or I have a similar problem. I think I read one on your blog. Someone was drinking too much caffeine. And then at night, they had to drink alcohol to get down from the caffeine. It's like, okay, that's really hard on the digestive system. And I was drinking too much caffeine. And then you wrote, like, well, try to minimize it. It's like, just don't go cold turkey. That might be too hard. Just go to one. And so I've gone to 1 cup. It's like, I feel a lot better. I drink more water and I eat nuts and I don't know. But it's like, we're social beings. It's like, well, how are you handling that problem? I'd like
Yes.
to learn.
One of the reasons I started writing fiction, I've been working on a novel for a while, and I had written a nonfiction book before that, specifically about Ayurveda, is that I'm kind of sick of telling people what to do. Like, it's a different energy. It's a different energy to be like, you're doing this, and that's not good for you, and this would be better for you. And I'm just kind of sick of it, to be honest. And I don't want to give people advice. I just want to be like, you know what? Like, this person did this, and okay, so what? Maybe I gave them the idea or whatever, but my teachers taught me how to do it, or I tried it and it worked for me. But I like this. It feels softer and it feels more approachable to be able to just talk about what somebody is experiencing and what they tried and how it benefited them or how it didn't benefit them, and then how they refined it. So I do see what you're saying about how stories and fiction move people.
And I also think without that didactic imperative, do this, don't do this, without that, you are inviting the reader or the listener to engage in the way that they want and what they need at that time, and not creating a hierarchy where you know everything and they know nothing. So there's more imaginative engagement with the story on the behalf of the reader or listener. Like, oh, I recognize that. Oh, yeah, I felt that. Oh, how are they going to handle that? So their imagination gets engaged as kind of co-narrating the story instead of a hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
How do you know how they need to be spoken to? So if, I know when I teach, I have to be really careful. I teach writing. It's like, I don't want to be conjuring up the image of a stern, angry father that tells you what to do all the time. That's not it. There's going to be a problem with that, right? And you're going to rebel. It's like, I'm not doing anything she says. Because unbeknownst to me, I brought up this figure that you hated or had a conflictual relationship with.
And frankly, you are bringing up like all of my issues with parenting.
I get it.
You
Yeah.
know, the how you move people, yeah, the reactions that people have to being told there is a better way, which is similar to anyone we're in the climate field, right? Where or just saying like that way of living is not beneficial. This way of living is more beneficial. It's the same kind of thing.
It
Whether it's
is.
you're talking to your kid and saying like you got to eat more vegetables cuz it's going to help you go to the bathroom more. I love that you brought up this power dynamic, right? Because even in the healing world, like we're always trying to figure out like okay, are you an authority or are you an anti-authority, right? Cuz the anti-authority shares their personal experience with something, whereas the authority is like, "Oh, I know best because I'm the expert." And that's kind of like our conventional medical model. And so I feel like there's something here where we're trying to find, at least I personally feel this way. I feel like I'm trying to find that way of sharing that is not authoritative and hierarchical and yet is still impactful and helps people.
I mean, it reminds me of the Bible. Jesus was, it was all parables or stories, and that was his method of teaching, which was compassionate. And you also have to remember, in writing fiction, I always think that about this too. Like, we know just fragments of each other. The whole is never uncovered, the whole of another. So it's like, well, what could I possibly offer you because I'm now meeting a fragment of you rather than the whole? And so maybe a story is a way to go because also in a story, having written a lot of fiction, it's open to a lot of different interpretations. And maybe they just need a kind voice. When I was in therapy, what I needed is just someone to sit with me and listen to me and be there, not offer a lot of advice. It was just that. It was a very loving relationship and just in that room that someone would actually, the art of listening. It's like, that's pretty powerful. That was it.
Yeah, and it's good to practice that with nature, that art of listening. How do you do that? Do you have a practice for that? Do you meditate outside or
I don't meditate. I meditate at night in my room. I'm outside at least once a day, either walking or biking. And I need it because I've been usually writing in the imaginative world, me creating another world. And I need to get out and I'm fully immersed in the present. I'm hearing the birds, smelling, like right now, a lot of flowers are out, even though it's February, and just being in the air. So, as much as I can, like noticing, smelling, listening, I always am listening to the birds and then trying to spot, oh, there's that. I hear the blue jay and then I'll spot them or the crows. So in the beginning, I think I was more intentional. Now I just do it. Like I'm in it now, not wondering about what I'm writing. Is that the right thing to be writing? I just need a break. It's something, get away from what I'm writing and be in the outside world. So I grew up in nature. I grew up in Washington State and we grew up on a lake. I was in and out of that water all the time, sailing, swimming, and rode my bike in the rain to school. So when you grew up on the western side of Washington, there's a lot of rain, but you just carry on. So I was brought up that way. Just get on your bike and go to school. Who cares if it's raining? So
I love that. And so great to have that. I had that similar kind of immersion in nature growing up and wish that for as many people as can access that. All right, final question today. We've just blown, I feel like we
I
could
know.
talk a lot more. It went by so fast, huh? Okay, so I love to ask everybody this question. What does the wisdom of the body mean to you?
Mm. Well, I have learned it's constantly talking and it's telling you what it needs, the pains, or, oh, that food really feels good to me. Good job eating that salad. My stomach really likes salad. Oh, that walk was, it's constantly chattering to you. So not pushing it down or ignoring it. I used to do that and it got me in a lot of trouble. I got sick a lot. Listen to it, take care of it, because you are part animal. You're a lot animal. And if you can listen, you can prevent things and help the body and help yourself.
I love it. Yes, we definitely are part animal, something we forget all the time.
With big brains. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I know you're teaching different places and that your books are available. Can people just go wherever to find your books? Tell people how to find your work and learn more
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
Well, I have a website, ninaschuyler.com. But you could go to an independent bookstore and ask for my books there. If they don't have them, they can order them. And there's also links on the website if you can click and order. So that would be so kind and so generous.
Yeah. Well, God, thank you so much for being here, Nina. I've loved talking with you, and it's just been such a treat to dive into this little world we had here today together. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
If you are embarking on a fertility journey and are ready to have your mind blown about what your body is really capable of and how it's impacted by the environment, then check out my book, The Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility. You can actually download the introduction to the book for free on my website at heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, Grzych.com. Read the intro for free and then buy the rest of this fertility enlightening book pretty much anywhere books are sold. Feeling like there's just not enough time in the day? You're not alone. Many of my clients, like Jessica, come to me overwhelmed, struggling and feeling the effects of aging. After just a few Ayurvedic sessions, Jessica was sleeping better, her digestion was regular, and she felt her vitality again. Ayurveda isn't about adding more to your plate. It's about creating balance so you can make time for what matters. Ready to reset your health and your life? Visit heathergrzych.com and book your consultation today. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, Grzych.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.